Hello? Yeah? Okay, cool. So, hello everyone, and thank you for joining our little workshop here. We're gonna try to experiment a little bit actually with a toolkit called XRDok. It's an open source toolkit that we started creating back in October 2018, so it's still quite new, but good enough for all of us to try it out here, that allows journalists to create CGI content, CGI stories in an easy and fast way. It's a hands-on workshop, as it's stated in the program, so we're actually going to try to live demo the toolkit, and you get to try it out yourself as well. So please get out your computers if you do have a computer, a laptop with you. I did check if it's possible to do it with a cell phone as well. You might be able to try it out on your cell phone as well, but if you have a computer, you should use your computers. So before we start, let us just introduce ourselves real quick. So my name is Linda Rath-Wiggins. I'm a media scientist. I started working for Deutsche Welle, Germany's international broadcaster. I worked there for about 8 years, and then I co-founded the startup called Fragments with Stephan and a few more people, and it's all about creating virtual reality projects and augmented reality projects in collaboration with media companies.
Yes, and allow me to introduce myself as well. Stephan is my name. I'm originally a computer scientist. I studied until 2011 before going to the German Geoscience Research Center in Potsdam, and the first years of my business I was occupied with the German-Indonesian tsunami early warning system, building the system and teaching people, training people. And after the project was done, I was kind of left open for other projects, other jobs, and coincidentally I met Linda, and through a colleague of hers I got into VR. And since I could code a little, I was really intrigued by the medium and thought the possibilities are endless and really nice. But I had the luck that I was able to program, and so I could kind of like express myself quite easily in that medium. And through the first projects that we did together with newsrooms, we learned that it takes actually a little more than just knowing how to code stuff. There's a lot of people actually involved when creating a successful journalistic VR project. So it's not just coders and maybe the person that knows about the story, but there's also, you could say, people that know about theater, that know about stages, that know about interaction design involved in this. And so that made the first projects quite costly, as we will see in some examples. And so we decided to, why not open this up and kind of democratize that field, giving people a tool set to play around with, to prototype and develop their ideas and express themselves in this medium. And that's what this, the next 1.5 hours will be about.
Yeah, so just to repeat a little bit what Stephan just mentioned. So we're a team of 5 co-founders. 2 of us come from the more journalistic side, and 3 of us come from a more programming engineering side. And as you just mentioned, Stephan, it's the perfect combination to build VR projects and AR projects, because it's not enough to just have coders, it's not enough to just have journalists. You need the combination of both of them, which is why we've been successful in building some really nice projects in the past. And the idea of XRDok came when we were looking at all the great CGI-based stories in the past. I'd say around the last 3 to 4 years, maybe 5 years, we've seen some really great CGI or VR, virtual reality projects. Some of the examples I pointed out here is, for example, the BBC-based We Wait. It came out, I think, in 2016, and it was about, so the user was allowed to go with a family from Turkey to Greece on a boat and listen to some very emotional and private conversations that the family there had. So it was a really interesting way to understand the refugee crisis from a different point of view, from a more experiential point of view. The other project that I want to point out is 6x9. Who of you know 6x9 from The Guardian? It was also, I think, it came out 2016, and by The Guardian, it was about how it actually feels to be in a small cell for such a long time by yourself. And again, the user was able to have access to a place that he or she usually might not have, and really understand some of the issues that they wanted to raise there in a more experiential way. Another one comes from the German public broadcaster WDR, Cologne-based, and it's about the cathedral in Cologne and how it looked like in different times, for example, medieval times. So VR allows users to go to different places, go to different time frames. You can change perspectives, you can even be other people or things even, and you can become very small or very big. So it gives you a lot of different options, and the problem that we see, or the challenge that we see here, all these projects are quite big, and costly and time-consuming, and you need a lot of expertise. And so our question was, well, what about the individual journalist who wants to experiment with VR or CGI as well, but they neither have the time nor maybe the programmatic skills to actually try out something. And so this is why we decided to create XRDok, and the idea behind it is to have an easy setup, a fast turnaround, and a way to prototype for CGI, again, without having to think about this big team and a lot of money that you might need. So for daily productions, maybe even. XRDok is based on A-Frame, for those of you who know A-Frame. So it's web-based, which means you don't have to, this is why it says easy setup, you don't have to install anything. It just works on any browser, so that means you can work on it on your laptop, but also your mobile phone, which is nice. And the idea is to give you, the journalist, modules that you can reuse. And so you will have to, who knows HTML? Some HTML? A little bit. So you will need to use a little bit of HTML, but there's no real coding, no real programming involved, like JavaScript or anything. We're going to show you how it works in a second. And then, so we thought of specific events, specific actions, and models that we give you, that we offer you, that you can use, and you can shuffle them around and create your own CGI project. So we created a few templates on our own that you can use in our library, but of course the nice thing is, who's heard of Sketchfab? It's this really huge library of 3D models where you can just download any model. I think the latest Galaxy, Samsung Galaxy and the iPhone, you can capture your own 3D models. So in the future, 3D models won't be something very abstract. They're going to be around. So you can also just download models from Sketchfab or from Poly. That's a platform from Google. You can get some 3D models as well. Yeah. you want to talk about the use cases?
Yeah, and so as Linda said, the main challenge is not to just have 3D objects just sitting around and doing nothing, maybe being animated or so. The great challenge that we saw when we developed our first project was how to get how to support the narrative, how to support a linear story that is user-driven. Because in VR, a lot of this, the experience is about enabling the user to be the co-narrator of the story, to say how to progress, where to look, where to go next, what to start next. And that kind of, in the discussion with journalists and the people that wanted to tell a story, it was always very challenging in the beginning to get the playbook right. Where do we have the sequences? Where do we have parallel events? What are optional events that might not get triggered? So it's completely different from creating a movie or a linear piece of media production. And so that's why our main focus right now with a tool set is supporting these narrative patterns, as you could say. And also play with visual elements that are known also from other media, classical 2D data visualization. That's an example we're currently exploring with the German regional broadcaster RBB 24. And this thing takes a chart, a CSV file with some data, and there's not much you have to do. You just plug it in to a short HTML snippet, and then you get an experience like that, so that users can actually traverse information and get a spatial sense of what this is, what an inclination of a graph could mean, where things narrow down because resources might become scarce, and that's effectively being visualized. And getting this thing set up, all you need to do is have your data that you want to visualize in such a two-dimensional visualization. Could be one-dimensional as well. But yeah, that's something we're currently looking at and developing. Then with Deutschland Radio Kultur, our use case is, since it's the 150-year anniversary of the chemical periodic system, or periodic system of chemical elements, or whatever. And
the ABC of nature? The
ABC of nature. And with that, we want people to kind of like go into a sort of mini lab and get to know elements a little better by a combination of effective visuals and some audio pieces that are produced that are actually already alive. So there currently is a large...
Okay, can't really hear it.
So the audio doesn't play, unfortunately, via the...
That's okay.
Yeah, so there's a little piece of information about the atom, how it works, how the shell structure is, how the electrons fly around there. Kind of like a small schematic, and the idea is to extend this to how would these elements form molecules and how would we know them, and where do we actually encounter water, for example, and then put this also into this immersive experience. So this is still in the development stage of an experience.
And you can see it also by...
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And all the main parts are open sourced. In the end, what we produce is a library that everyone can reuse in their own projects. We'll continue to build this. We'll try to continue to support this. And basically, the way we try to approach this is similar as to the workshop that was in here 2 hours ago. There was the design thinking workshop. So we try to think about problem spaces. How might people need information, visualization patterns, and how can we support and build these through the library. And that's available on GitHub. /fragments/XRDok, so you can check it out. There's also all the information going to be found on there. And yeah, we hope that we can continue this project over the time of it being funded further. And another location where you can encounter this is on a platform called Glitch. Glitch is basically a host for all sorts of small web projects. It basically replaces things that a web server does. Just serve some HTML and some code alongside. So you don't have to set up anything. You can just go there, take existing projects, and remix them, so you can kind of like create your own versions and adapt them. If you create an account, you can also store your versions and share them with others. And that's what we did under glitch.com at Fragments. You will find all sorts of demo pieces that we so far have created with XRDok. And we also created a special collection for this event. There is the blue one. It's called #IGF. And this is the part where we'll have the practical portion of this 1.5 hours event now.
Yeah, so who has a computer here? Okay, so we have three. And then I can also give you this one, so we'll have 4, and then maybe we can pair up in 2 and look at each other's screens.
Yeah.
And also, if you know, you can try it on your mobile phone as well.
I don't want to.
Oh no, you're fine.
I actually want, but.
But yeah, so please go to glitch.com
Okay, try with this phone.
/@fragments. Stephan is going to put it up. Glitch.com.
It seems probably has problems with the adapter. Yeah.
Are you a Mac user?
No, I will be.
So maybe, yeah.
I will try with the phone.
Okay.
So everybody has a way to, okay, let's hope that the phone is good enough. And the website is glitch.com /@fragments.
No, there's no need to sign in. Yeah.
Yeah? Sorry? Okay, cool. So just to give you, again, a little context, so the idea right now is to just follow along and get an idea of... So the idea is to just follow along right now and to get an idea of how the toolkit actually works. And then we're going to pair up in maybe 2 or 3 people together, thinking about what kind of use cases you see for this, not necessarily just for this use case, but in general, what would you like to prototype for CGI productions, and then we can discuss that, and we can talk about how we are actually going through these kinds of projects, so that might help you for your next CGI project.
Yeah. So on the site, you'll see a couple of very colorful elements. It's a new service. That's why it's kind of like appealing to color and emotion. Don't get confused. You'll easily find your way around. So on this main page, that kind of like is our Fragments team page. You see there are a couple of members and contributors to the project, and we do have a couple of collections in here. And if you go to that IGF collection, you'll find a project in there that is our IGF follow along. And that is something we have prepared so that everybody can just kind of like follow along on their own sort of pace. We'll take it slow and we'll kind of like try a couple of things, we'll see the effects, and then you can try out a couple of things on your own. So if you will, please just open the project, and you will see a new screen that consists of, I'm going to make it a little slower just so that everything is on the screen. You basically see a screen with an empty scene, and this is already our VR ready scene. So this is a 3D scene that we can move in, we can turn around, and if somebody would click on that cardboard symbol in there and have a phone, it would actually immediately jump into a VR mode. So if you would tilt your phone then to the side, if you click on this and tilt your phone to the side, it will actually go into VR mode, showing two pictures if you hold it in landscape mode, and then you could insert it into a headset like a cardboard and actually see it. And you can already move around. The camera basically will follow the phone's movement. Did that work so far for the most of you? No?
Yeah, I mean, there is nothing on there yet, so you won't really see if you're moving it, probably.
Yeah. Yeah, it should actually rotate, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, we'll probably get to those parts in the next portion. So what this screen basically consists of, this is like a starting page of this project, and you see that in here there's a tab where you can see code, app, or both. What it basically is that you already have, what you see is what you get panel. On the right, this is like the result of whatever you have created. On the left part, that's what basically traditional coding is. And to get to the follow along, why don't you try to click remix this down here? What this will do, it will create your very own copy of the initial project. In my case, it was called Shade Clementine. And this is exactly what
Wait, did everybody click on?
we had provided for you.
Everyone clicked on remix, your own?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So what you now have is this own portion, and here on the left side we see all the files that contribute to our project, and there's just in classical Markdown, which is similar to what also is used on Wikipedia for documentation. There is a documentation that helps you to kind of like get along if you hadn't had me sitting in front of you. So you can always kind of come back and refer to that. The main portion that it includes is an HTML file. This is basically, since we said we take out all the passing and coding and interaction, all you have to do is like edit a simple and plain HTML file. It is because this is not just some set of structured data, but this also, it's basically a real web application that is contained in an HTML file. So the structure, I'm just going to go quickly through some sections, and then I'm going to get to the main parts of it. So an HTML file usually contains some sort of header. That is a section that gives some information about the project. So you have something like a meta field with a name and a content field and a title. And those are things that usually appear in the browser in the top bar to identify just the project or the site. And in here, the most important part is because VR just doesn't come out of the box, but there have been people that have been thinking and designing and building a lot. There are so-called scripts that you can use to import, and these scripts are kind of like recipes for whatever you tell in your HTML file what you want. These will do the heavy weight and the lifting. And what we basically included in here is the main files for a framework that is called A-Frame. And what A-Frame does is it gives us for free, basically, all the elements we need to just play out VR in a web browser. No matter if it's on a phone or if it's on your computer or on any other system, it's able to detect where it's running on, say on a smartphone, and it will automatically know, okay, I will use the gyroscope now for the camera rotation, and I will put these two images for both eyes, so I can put it into a headset. And even if I had it on a desktop computer system and I have a more powerful VR system attached to it, like an Oculus or HTC Vive, it will also recognize this and render this experience. And this comes through just importing the very first line. The second adds just physics to it. That means that objects can fall down or they bounce off other things. And that's very useful, so we include that as well. The third one is going to be very interesting for data journalists, because that's just a library that allows us to parse structured data, CSV files, for example, or Excel files, if we want to also include data. And the last part of it is the XRDok JavaScript file, and that contains all the stuff that we've programmed in the past half year and included to allow you to make interactive CGI and VR experiences. So after speaking about this header section that's rather technical, we'll directly jump into what's called the body. This is basically where all the interesting stuff in an HTML file happens. And are the concept of HTML tags familiar to the most in here? Yeah, so basically these are things that describe to a browser what will come next in this document. And if you take a look at this show live thing here, it will open a new tab. And this will basically be everything that so far the browser has understood from our HTML file. It has set up a 3D space. It has set up this, this icon for us that would go full screen. And if we went full screen now on a phone, I think with the new tab, so I'm going back to this page before. If you press show live on a phone and you get to the new tab, then I think the browser mode should definitely work on your phones. So for those of you who haven't gotten it in the first case, does it work now? Great. Great. So, yeah, now just like in a painting, we would just start going about and adding elements to it. And first thing would be a simple sky with a background color. And
Can you make it a little bit bigger?
I'll try to make it a little bit bigger, yeah. So this is an element, yeah, it basically creates a large sphere, paints it blue, and puts it around us. At the center with a radius of 1,000 units, that's kind of like roughly 1,000 meters. And that's basically our beautiful blue sky above the horizon. Then we also add some lighting, because otherwise it would be pretty dark in this scene. And there are several types, and the ones included in here, we just said, okay, we want to have some sort of ambient lighting that's kind of a diffuse, indifferent light that doesn't really have a source, but it kind of makes things light up, which is very convenient for us. And then we also have included a spotlight. That's just to kind of like shine light on something very directly. And that's this portion that you can see on the floor. So this is a light that has a source somewhere behind us, and this simply shines like a spotlight on the floor. And of course, to reflect a light, we also have a floor to get around. So these are the basic things that we have for now in our scene. And there's not much where XRDok has been involved so far, I can tell you that. So these are the things that just get us set up into an environment and get started. So now I'll slowly add a couple of components into the scene, and we will do this by uncommenting. So in an HTML file, as you can see here, all this stuff appears in gray. This is what the browser right now will just ignore and not print out. And comments are basically done through a letter combination of having this less than sign, the exclamation mark, followed by 2 hyphens. And we will just delete them now. And what the platform will tell us now is that we also should delete the end of the comment, or the uncomment, better said. So basically, a comment like that just wraps whatever you want not included in your file. So when you go back now to what it shows live, one thing is that everything you do in here is immediately saved. So it's auto-saved, you don't have to save anything. And when we go back now, all of a sudden we see a yellow box.
Did everyone follow who wanted to follow? Okay, cool.
So everyone who followed should have a box now. And now there's one thing you might wonder. So a lot of these things are kind of 3D CGI terminology or common terminology. So as a person who works with 3D, you're pretty acquainted usually with objects, and objects in space, they do have a position, and that's usually formed through a right-hand coordinate system. So basically the axes X, Y, and Z, and the X being kind of like the horizontal position, and everything that's positive on this goes to your right, everything that's negative goes to your left. The second parameter is the vertical component. Positive numbers rise above the ground, negative numbers rise below the ground. And it's a little weird since it's a right-hand coordinate system. No, it's a left-hand coordinate system, sorry. With the z-axis, that's kind of like the forward part, you would expect like rising numbers would kind of like go in front. They don't. They actually go to the back. So that's why when we put this box at -3, one above, and -2, it appears kind of like in the front left. It also has other properties like colors. And what if you just made it, say, magenta? magically the box will just have a magenta appearance. Or we could just make it, say, light blue. And it appears in a very nice light blue. There's one thing that we built into this box, and it has a little magic, but it doesn't really show. It would show, and I'm just going into a mode that you could try, but you need not necessarily follow along, but it gives you an implication of kind of like where the tool works its magic. So I'm going to just open the developer's console, where I'm going to get a lot of messages, and yep, this one. And if I click the box now, a new message will appear down there. I can't really pull this up, so you just have to trust me. It says XR event, XR click. And when I click it again, it gets a number, and there's a little counter. There's a blue thing. It grows, it grows, it grows, it grows. So whenever I click it, it just says, okay, I know I got clicked. And that's really, really helpful, because these events, we can use that to kind of like chain and trigger actions, because we can just say, okay, a user wanted something from that box to do. And we will see in the next section how powerful this can be. But first, we'll give us a little, because when we walk around here now, you can use the keys, if you have a computer, WASD, to kind of like just walk around. But it's a little boring since we're really slow, and also we kind of like just crawl on the ground. So we will give this a little power and put the camera, which is basically us, the user, into a fly mode, and make it a little faster. So now we can kind of like also fly through the air and get a much better look of the scene. So if you have a laptop with you, that kind of makes things more convenient. If you're on a phone, then you'll kind of like look around anyway, but so you need not really follow along, but it still is kind of nice. So now, since we now have a new camera, we know that we can kind of trigger objects. Let's kind of put that to use. So there's a next section. It is called several boxes and a cylinder that can be grabbed. Both boxes react on click to change color. I will first just uncomment this and show what it is, and then I'll kind of like explain a little bit what happens in there in the next section. So now we see, let's start it again and see what happens. We've got 3 boxes, the one box that we already inserted before. There are 2 new ones. We've got a cylinder that just fell down and now rests on the floor. We can still click this box. It would still, in the background, say, I've been clicked. And this box actually changes its color when we click it, and it changes it back. And this box also changes its color, but when we click it again, it doesn't. It just does it once. And very cool is we can click on the cylinder and we can grab it. And we can move along with it. We can just take it and drop it again.
Does that also work on the phone?
And that also should work on the phone. So when you go into your full screen mode on the phone, you can also grab everything and drop it. I kind of missed the blue box, but if it would hit the blue box, it would kind of like rest on it shortly and fall down. So while this might not be super complex yet, these are already basics that you can kind of like chain to a multitude of actions. And imagine if you didn't use boxes but other objects, you'd already have something like a small scene that's some sort of an interactive experience. To go over it a little, we have 3 elements in here. We have one box, we have a second box in here, and we have this cylinder. So why don't we start with the cylinder first? The cylinder has kind of like its properties, so it has a color, it has an initial position where it kind of starts out in the scene, it's got a height, so it's 5 times taller than it's wide, and now it's got these 2 attributes here that are super important because those radically change how it behaves. Instead of just sitting around there and being static, adding XRGrab to it and a dynamic body just says, okay, this one will react actually to physics. It will fall down. And through XRGrab, it reacts on our grab. And the goal for XRDok is to make this transparent, whether you're using a mouse on a desktop or whether you're using your phone and grabbing it, or whether you're using a high-end headset and the controllers, you can still also grab this, and it will kind of like be transparent. For people who want to develop, they do not want to care about how their experience will distribute. They just expect it should run. Users should naturally just, whenever they want to grab something, they should be able to do it, regardless of the platform that they're on. So that's one thing it does. Coming to the box, and I know it's this one here, the green one. What we basically added is that we also added a click, and we tell it what to do when it clicks. And what it will do is that it adds an animation, and it will change its color to green. You need not worry yet about the precise syntax, and it might be a little overwhelming at the start, but once you do a little bit of it, you'll quickly get the hang of those. So why don't we say, okay, we add a little more blue to it. So kind of like change this color string in here. And what it will now do, it will no longer turn green, but it will have a little lighter blue. I should have chosen a different color. It's not really that visible. So I'll revert that, and we'll just say, okay, let's make it a little more red. So when we click it now, we'll get actually a yellowish tone. So very easy to quickly modify this, take the template, exchange it for whatever visuals you want to achieve. And the other box is a little more complex. So you see that I can click it, and it will kind of like reverse its color when I click again. And there's something that we built in. It's a little attribute called XRWait. That simply means that it will wait for a very specific thing to happen. And one thing is that it can wait on a collision event from the cylinder, actually. And the other thing is that it will just wait on a click to once change the material color to this hex code here, so to this color, and then it will simply revert. Once I click again, it will click back. And then it will kind of like just repeat. It will be like a toggle. So you can always set and reset something. Any questions so far from the audience?
The dynamic body has also properties. I can set up a kind of
Microphone, sorry.
Yeah.
I
I'd like to know if the dynamic body can have properties like a kind of material, or if it can bounce, or you can choose water or solid or rubber or something else.
Yes, so you can assign it at the least, you can assign it a weight, a specific weight. That's based on our Earth parameters. Yeah, you kind of like have to, yeah, you specify that with the physics engine, but this is something that we just use. We do not, it's not like a part of the development. It's like something we would reuse, but just telling you, like within this framework, within this setting, you can change those parameters as well of physics, so that you could say, okay, this is rather an air balloon cylinder, or it's a really heavy concrete cylinder, and then it would drop considerably heavier. Yeah, yeah, you can do that. So, just for clarification, what I'll do, I'll just uncomment this thing again with the boxes, so we don't get confused. And don't forget at the end to close it again, because otherwise it might have unexpected results. Now, we talked about all sorts of models that you can include, and we are also building some on our own. And one thing we have also worked on, and yeah, getting a model into the scene is actually super, super easy. So you just reference, and they come in a very specific standard, and a new standard for displaying 3D models in web environments is GLTF, and it's now in, I think, in the second phase of the standard. And the good thing is that it's just a little background knowledge on 3D models. They usually come in either a transport format or in a display format. So, and sometimes when exporting models from one program, so 3D programs are like Maya or 3ds Max or Blender, for example, as a very great open source tool. When moving them along, sometimes things like a material or an animation can't be imported or exported, so there are some problems. And that's something that GLTF tries to tackle, that you both have the transport information so that the format is quite small and transportable over networks, and that each program that treats it, that tries to display it, knows exactly what to do with it. And that's, of course, something that's very helpful in web context. And yeah, so when you uncomment it, and now it's really cool that we have our flying opportunity. Who knows what this is? It is an airport. And it's, yeah, a mystery if it really exists or if it actually will exist. So this is an airport that was supposed to open in, I think, for the first time in 2007, and still is unfinished. So this is the new Berlin airport that's still under construction for whatever reasons. And it's actually a great piece for immersive VR journalism. Imagine you can bring your viewers to actually land there, which they can't in reality. And by having them go from exiting the plane through wherever they need to pick up their luggage, kind of like say, okay, these were pain points here, or this delayed construction, or that delayed construction. And this can kind of like create really cool value for viewers and users and an audience. So yeah, that's why we build it, and we actually try to think if we can kind of like pull this off with a newsroom in Germany. Yeah, so I'll leave that in and uncommented for a while. Now what's with some very simple multimedia things? Since we know we can kind of like make things change color, we can make things move in certain ways, why not have something that can turn on or off a media? And so that's why we kind of like created a little button. Let's see if this actually would, I think it's...
Oh yeah, there's somebody playing it.
So is this the Philips screen? Is this the Philips screen? Or which audio output would that be? A screen TV?
But with the
HDMI?
cable, we don't have
Ah.
an audio connection.
Ah,
We
okay.
need to plug this and set.
Of course, yeah, it has one, but now, of course, it hides the one because
Connection.
yeah, it's on the other side. I'll have to switch the. But I'll do. We want to hear some sound.
You need to go to preferences.
Sound preferences and go to the output. That one headphone port, right? External headphones.
Yes, I suppose, yeah.
Yeah. Is there something playing? So it wasn't something meaningful, but just a sound effect to show you that whenever your audience, for example, will experience or they come to some certain point, they can click or interact with something and start an audio, and you can kind of like give an audio piece some additional information to something. And of course, interaction designers in VR, they would say, okay, why a button? Isn't there something more useful? Of course, you can create the experience in a way that, for example, when you open a door, some audio plays or something, so that you can actually design and create your things in a way that's cool for your users too. But it wouldn't really change the technical side of it, so just using a button and playing a sound, it's just effectful. And for prototyping and just getting started, it's the perfect way to go. So, could anyone try this out yet? And hear a sound? It's very cool.
About interface, when you are using this one and you are in an immersive way, you can touch anything. You only walk in through the objects or the spaces. Okay, you can interact. I use a platform for create apps on the phone, and you can interact with the voice. You can use voice commands or yes, voice commands.
That would be actually a cool thing to integrate, yeah. So if you could set a vocabulary of commands like start or stop or continue, open. I try to think of how adventure games used to be in the 90s. You had a sort of vocabulary with a couple of words, verbs, take this, or go there, or use this with that. Something like that could effectively work, and could be interesting to implement something like that. The current solution kind of works that you get some sort of virtual cursor that kind of like comes like vertically out of your eyesight, and that you use that cursor to kind of trigger, and it would just like when you're on something, it would kind of like play a animation, and when the animation has finished, it would kind of like do the click, so that you can kind of like select things on purpose, even though you don't have anything. Yeah. And those were actually in early mobile VR days, that was like the solution. Most cardboards now, they do have some sort of toggle, either NFC or the newer Google cardboards, I think they just had a little switch that would actually simulate a tap. And you just tap and then click. But yeah, actually supporting both is, in terms of accessibility, the way to go and for designing. Yeah. So similar to just playing an audio, we could say, okay, why not show an image, something that we might have there, but we wouldn't want to show it all the time. And
Maybe you want to take out the model?
Relatively small right now. I'll just take out the model, yeah. That's a good idea. So, yeah, for example, you might have some visual information or a video. This image could also as well be a video and that you want to play, but you don't want to have it in the scene all the time. Then just create a toggle for it so users can kind of like just self-serve for future information and then hide it again. And you can also, of course, chain this, right? So once the user has seen the image, maybe there can come another section of things or events that you might change in. Something very effectful in VR has been, or a broad use of VR has actually been in the recent years 360. And creating interactive 360 is also something that could be a challenge. But with XRDok, you can actually use this relatively easy. And what we'll have in here is some sort of a background sphere. So this background sphere will be what holds our 360 image. And what we also put in there is a small button. And when we click it, it'll basically change our environment. I see that I still have the floor in here, and for the purpose of demonstration, I'll remove that as well, because it'll just disturb us in here. So now we have the image that we just used to have in 2D. We have it as kind of like a fancy abstract 360. And when we click this button, it changes. And we are kind of like transported into a new room, into a new section. And we can click it again. And congrats, you found a nice comic-styled green, lush landscape. And you can still click the cube, by the way, and it will still stay. I have been clicked. Now I click the button again. So, yeah, and you can kind of like circulate this, and so what does it have? These are basically 6 lines of code, and you can reuse them, or if you want to use it, just kind of like extend the components that are in there, add another source of an image, and just continue. And you can create how many images you have. You can just create a 360 slideshow with just 6 lines of code. You can copy that snippet, you can reuse it wherever you want. So sometimes, even though it might not be the best use in VR, people kind of like need a description of things, kind of like for reasons of maybe they don't understand the language or so. I mean, it's hard to create a VR experience if you can't see. So you probably can read, but sometimes maybe it would obstruct your view of other things. So you don't want really a full text to be seen all the time. And we built a little component that kind of like does this. So you can have like a small label on something and say, okay, read more or know more about this, and then you can put a quite long text in there and hide it as well. Or you combine this when bringing it up, you could start the audio that also reads it out loud, what is written in there, or kind of like translate it in a different language or so. So that's something, and this was actually designed, what was the model of it? Was it the AR core set?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
That was the,
So we
That's
actually
where we
took
got
some
the idea
inspiration from UX UI design from Google AR core developers that had this piece, and when they put it around models, and it was just, we felt it's nice, so we'll just take this as well. I think this was good common practice. So we just rebuilt it, and it didn't take long. And also this is a relatively longer template, but if you just copy this and add your own text into it, then it'll be actually a breeze. And once we would see, okay, this is pretty cool, people would start using it, then we can, of course, define this a little better, that you just provide, for example, a text file, and this whole thing becomes just one line of HTML. The cool thing is that using XRDok, you can kind of like create your own versions of this text field, like having it open to the side or to the bottom, or doing all sorts of crazy things. And the last thing I want to show now is we have a file in here that is actually the average annual air temperature in Berlin and Brandenburg from 1951 till 2018 in tens of degrees. And I will comment this portion in as well. And the piece where the actual juice is happening is in here, so we created something that's called XRGrab. That is something that takes this data and renders a graph from it. So pretty plain or straightforward, as you would also know from D3 or other 2D data rendering engines. Is basically take the data points and put it into a meaningful context and render it. And there's a little added stuff to it that actually creates a travel along this graph. So yeah, what you have is you start in the year 1951, and there's a button that tells you to start, and now we begin on kind of like a virtual travel alongside this graph. And you could, for example, put an audio piece in there, make the travel a little slower, kind of like explain what's going on there, how the temperatures have risen, what the actual meaning of the width of the path is. So the path is actually the amount of summer days per year. And it's interesting that in some years, actually, 1974 has been a relatively warm year, but it didn't have a very large number of summer days, actually. But overall, the winter was super mild, and that's why the average temperature was quite high. So, yeah, you can set a couple of breakpoints, you can set up text, you can kind of play around with the animations. And once you've found this kind of like works for your newsroom or news organization or whatever, reuse it. Put other data in there and maybe give it a different narrative, change the text, change audio. But you don't have to do a lot of work with it, since it would take maybe half an hour of configuration and discussing with people, okay, why we changed the color, should we kind of like maybe make the ride a little slower, but that's a matter of minutes changing it and not very complicated and very long. Yeah, so we've reached the bottom of the HTML file, and this was the quick ride, the quick tour of our IGF follow-along.
Yeah, and I mean, this was on glitch.com, so that means with when you use that platform, you don't have to get on your own servers, you don't have to download the whole thing via GitHub, but you can just work within here. And we actually organized 2 hackathons with journalists and asked, you know, how they could use it, and then We worked with them building specific use cases, like Stephan showed you some examples. And we wanted to open up the floor now and ask you in how far you've had experiences, in how far you've had any experience with CGI, VR in general, and whether you would see any use cases coming out of a toolkit like XRDok. So I don't know if you've had any ideas popping up while following along, or questions, of course, or feedback.
Thanks for the workshop, by the way. Maybe I lost this, but is there any good example of usage of this specific program that you can just send us?
Yeah, so right now, like Stephan showed, we are still working on use cases in collaboration with media companies.
Okay.
So once that is done, we will definitely be able to upload this on Glitch, but also on GitHub you'll be able to actually download it and edit it yourself. Mm-hmm.
And my next question will be, what do you think are the limits of this software compared to the software that, for instance, were used by the Guardian for 6x9 and so on and so forth?
Stephan, do you want to take that one?
The limits are might be a little bit in the fidelity. So 3D running in the browser still on some platforms might lag a bit of performance. So you can't really, especially when you target mobile, you can't really throw super high resolution textures in there. So you will be limited, of course, visually a little bit. What you will not really be limited is the interaction, the concept that you try to express or give your users, so that that is not much different from how it would be on a high-end computer system or with a real app production. One thing that could maybe be a little downside would be multi-user experiences, but they are honestly so rare right now, and I do think they will actually develop faster in web environments, since that's where people be more open to sharing and coming together. And if everybody had to install a new app wherever we wanted to meet people in virtuality, then yeah, we might do it for some, but not for the broad range of apps or use cases. So I think the web also has advantages in there. And for information visualization, I do think we do not need to be that high fidelity. There actually is a level of abstraction is actually quite useful to understanding stuff. If that answers it.
And then I guess also a non-technical answer would be that, we're trying to build a toolkit that can be used on a daily basis. So a project like 6x9 obviously takes a lot more than what is currently available via XRDok, and we're not necessarily trying to, copy Unity, for example. We're just trying to give journalists a tool that they can use. And I guess it does have quite a few limits when it comes to the features that might be usable, but at least journalists can start experimenting with the medium in general. Just lowering the technical barriers, that's our goal with XRDok. Mm-hmm.
We actually, when we applied for the project, we did have in mind, or we stated that the opportunity to build a graphical editor for this is also up for grabs, but we would not want to, so we just have limited time, limited resources on the project. We do not want to occupy ourselves building an editor for it. I think it's much more useful if we just open source it and say how it can work, how it can function, and then people can start either building an editor for the community or for themselves. Whenever they kind of feel, okay, they found a set of templates that work for them, they want to reuse them, then just go ahead and kind of like put another level of abstraction on that and make it even easier for, so like I said, right now, the lower part with the graph is quite long, since it also includes all the small points and you can still position them, but once you know, okay, this is how it's going to look like, this is how we're going to use it for certain types of data, then just wrap this in something else and give the journalists just the small access to it.
Yeah, so kudos for it seems to be a big development on what's out there in terms of what you can add to A-frame. So it's a really good step for the community. I was wondering specifically with this graph tool, like the moving tool, which is really cool, but I'm wondering, I was thinking stories to do with this one, but then I'm thinking, oh, does it make sense that you're actually moving along this way instead of, watching it on this plane? Like, which stories do I actually learn anything extra from following along like that? Which made me wonder whether you can make the camera follow the ups and downs, so it's more like a roller coaster.
Of course you can do that. You can take turns whenever, so you have like... of course you do have all the options that you'd like, so you can define your points and animations, so you could say, okay, when I click here, move this like that, or turn the light on, change color of the environment, make the whole thing grow or sync.
Can I do that with some of the tools you've built right now?
Yes, yes, and actually quite easily. There are very cool options to play around, and sometimes it might even trigger interesting side effects, since not everything's perfect yet, but we're getting there. Like for example, I was leaving out the collider thing in the first example because currently something didn't work with grabbing the cylinder and colliding with the box. It just wouldn't change the color of the other box, so we have to kind of investigate that bug.
I think for me the big thing I'm lacking when I'm seeing this right now is the incorporation of the 360 footage in it. Like, it feels unjournalistic in the sense that I'm just looking at a background play. Like, it takes too much fantasy. You're requiring too much of my fantasy. But I think as soon as you start integrating, like putting 360 spheres in there as the background picture, then I think there's actually some possibility to move there. To tell how the ice is disappearing on Greenland by following the graph but doing it on Greenland.
Absolutely, yeah. So if you had a water of body or you had a shell of ice that's kind of like shrinking over time, yeah, kind of those are the things that we want to know and get from the community. So we're super interested and super open. So Linda has our contacts, or they have been on the slides as well. So please get back to us if you have ideas or if you need help, if you need support. We're super interested in taking this from, of course this now has a level of abstraction, but getting this to something more real and imaginable, that's also our goal. So that's why we work together with RBB and Deutschlandfunk in these examples that are admittedly rather abstract. But we want to finally get there that we also can support more fidel experiences.
I'm really a rookie into this, so maybe this is a stupid question, but a combination with real video and this, is that possible in the future maybe?
So real 360 video or real 2D video? Yeah, you can play that as well. So you can also put a 360 video on there. The challenge is, if done in a way like that, the challenge is a bit the distribution then. So say you have maybe a 2 GB video that you want to run on the Sphere. In a browser you'd have to download it, or you make it streamable. Making it streamable is a little more complicated. That's like the portion. We're also working on interactive 360 storytelling platform that we eventually want to incorporate XRDok into. And there we kind of have solved this problem. You can upload media and films, and it can be 2D, it can be 360, and it just streams and plays as far as technology and platforms allow.
Yeah, if I understand correctly, Stephan, please correct me if I'm wrong. So in this portion here, remember when we were clicking and then the background changed? I'm sure that if you don't use the JPEGs but 360 videos, then you can actually already work with the 360 videos. So what you would do in this case is you go to assets, and then you upload your new file into here, and then you refer to it in the HTML, and then it works already. Any other questions or ideas that might have popped up, or if not, then I guess let's call it a workshop. Thank you very much for your patience. We're going to be here, of course, if you have further questions, or contact us at a later point. Thank you so much.
Thank you.